Hi, this is Brian Hegney, Instructor of Communication at High Point University. This little series of videos is kind of going to be about taking a sketch that you have and preparing it to put it maybe into a character board, something like that, add some color to it. So one of the things I'm going to do right now is, whoa, no, is kind of show you why we turned this character, this sketch, into a smart object. If you recall, I have this narwhal layer here. I can go into it whenever I want as a smart object, turn on and off layers, save it, and it will update up here. But what I want to do is change my canvas size because I actually may need to create a character board, let's say. And that character board might need to be maybe 600 by 900 pixels wide. So I'm going to go and set up my canvas here. And you can do that by going to Image Canvas Size. And when I do that, I'm going to set this to pixels just to see what I have here. And I have, so this is actually pretty big, or bigger than I need it to be. So mine's going to be 1600 pixels wide by 900 pixels tall. And I'm going to say OK to that. And it says, hey, something's wrong. It's going to be smaller, and I know that. I'm going to proceed. Okay. I actually don't. Okay, that's fine. So that might seem terrible to you, but it's not. And I kind of want to show you the reason why we do a smart object. Number one, okay, I'm going to right-click and duplicate my layer. And I'm going to call it, narwhal copy is fine. And I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to pretend like this is actually a raster image. I'm going to take away the smart object properties. Okay? So now I have two things. One of them is a smart object, and one of them is not a smart object. And I'm going to go ahead and resize those by hitting Control-T, and hitting Control-T allows me to free transform it, sorry. I can make it about this small. I can always resize that if I need to. I'm going to do the same exact thing to the other narwhal right here. Okay, so they're almost exactly the same. The issue is, you know what? I'm realizing that 1600 by 900 pixels is pretty tiny. If I want to print this out at 300 pixels per inch, that's really only 3 inches tall. I probably want to do something, I don't know why I wrote those for myself. If I want to do 300 pixels per inch for printing, and I want it to be, let's say, how many inches tall? Let's do 12 inches tall. No, oops. 300 times 12. That's 3600. So I'm just going to resize my canvas. And I'm going to set it to pixels. And I'm going to set it to relative. And I'm going to set that height to, what did I say that was? 3600 pixels. That's not at all what I thought it was going to be. Okay, height is 3600 pixels. And then, of course, I want this to be, Alright, so I'm going to say that's 3600 or 6400 wide by 3600 tall. That'll give me a nice, I think, fairly decently sized image to work with. Now when I resize that, obviously my characters are a little bit too small. So I'm going to show you what happens when I resize them. Again, I'm going to select my smart object, which was that first one I created, resize it a little bit bigger, double click it there. Now when you resize an image, I should have shown that a little bit more. I can make it really tiny. You could accept it by doing a couple things. Number one, clicking this check mark after hitting Control T. You can resize it, hit the checkbox or check mark there. If you want to resize it again, hit Control T, resize it. I'm holding down Shift and dragging the corners, which will resize it with keeping constraints instead of distorting it, right? I don't like doing that. So I'm going to actually fix that by clicking this little chain link up there. There we go. So holding down Shift will stop that from distorting anyway. I'm going to resize that up here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the non-smart object. I'm going to hit Control T, resize that. Already you should be seeing something a little bit weird, and I'm going to accept it by clicking the checkbox. And unfortunately, it didn't do what I thought it would do. So let me do this one more time. I'm going to pretend like, okay, this is a really tiny thing there. Hit Enter. Yes, sorry. This is going to be really tiny as well. Okay, hit Enter. Now I'm going to go and resize those again, scale those back up. Double click it, Control T, rescale that back up. Okay, now you're really seeing something terrible is going on. And that's the point I want to get across, is that smart objects keep all the pixels, they never delete the pixels. But when something is not a smart object, when you make it smaller, it actually deletes those pixels away from its memory. So that's why we are using smart objects. I'm going to get rid of that non-smart object there. And so that's what we're doing. So I resize the canvas, and now I can resize this character to be kind of whatever I want it to be. I have a few more minutes. I think what I'm going to do is kind of make the background slightly, maybe I'm going to give the background a color, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer. This will hit home the idea of the difference between the smart object itself and then the inside the smart object and outside the smart object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, I think I'll create a gradient background. So I'm going to create a gradient from some blues, because I think I want this character to live in some deep water, and it's blue water. And it's going to be kind of a light blue for the foreground, and I'm going to create a background that's just a little bit darker, like that. We'll see how that works. Now, with the gradient, I'm going to click on the gradient tool, right there, gradient, and I can hit G. And it's really easy to do it. There's two gradients I personally use a lot. One is a linear gradient, and that's where you left-click and just drag it, and it's going to go from light to dark, or the foreground color to the background color, sorry. It's not always light to dark, it's just, that's how I set mine up. In whichever direction you draw your line, right? So if you start to the left, draw to the right, it goes from foreground to background, left to right. Draw right to left, foreground to background, right to left. You can hold down Shift and make a, where's my mouse? Shift, you can make a straight line or 45 degrees. You really need that to be so. And then one of my favorites is polar gradient. So with a polar gradient, or is that what they call it here? Radial gradient. If you left click and drag, it's going to take the foreground, is going to be the center of where you drag from, and the background will go to the edges. So it all depends on what you're trying to do. And the smaller you drag your line, right, that's how it's going to feather or fade from your foreground to the background. So the smaller the line you draw, the quicker it transitions. If I drag it from the center out to the edges, it transitions throughout. So I'm going to keep this, I think, with a polar gradient just for fun. And you can see I can turn that on or off. And now you should be able to tell when I go into this image, when I double click into the smart object, I see, you know, just the smart object itself, and I can turn on that mustache, save that after I exit, and there's that mustache again, right? But of course, I'm going to turn that off, X out here, and that's the second. This is the second end of the second video for kind of how I'm going to set up this character board and kind of add a color image in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day. Bye, bye, bye.